eat into your bottom line to be able to support children that need it. So that's something I'm interested in hearing from you about. The mandatory information sessions and assessments that have been introduced by the department. Now that's something that was raised with me fairly quickly and by a lot of people because of the concern of the impact that would have, particularly on regional areas, because these assessment and information sessions are only being held at a prescribed time and place in Sydney. So if you've got a community preschool and you've got your volunteer committee, they would be required, each of those, anyone that was coming into a role where they had responsibility for management of a service, they would be required to attend one of these sessions. Now, as I understand, the department has come back and said, oh, no, you've misunderstood it and it's all okay. But we still have no clarity around who is actually required to go to these sessions, where they will be available, and how often. So that is something that I'm keeping an eye on, and I think the potential impact of that on community preschools is quite enormous, and something that I don't think has been appreciated by the department. Well, it hasn't been, because you wouldn't come out with these ridiculous ideas in the first place. Then the other thing is the SEP, which is a State Environmental Planning Policy for Educational Establishments and Childcare Facilities. So that was on public exhibition, that closed. Various groups made submissions, and there were 130 submissions made to the Minister about the draft SEP. Now, amongst those submissions were a lot of stakeholders from early childhood sector about the concern of largely around oversupply in long day care services, and that what we're seeing is, in an unregulated market, that instead of services going into areas of greater need, we are seeing more services coming up in areas where there is already enough or too many services to meet the need. So there's a lot of concern amongst the sector that without any controls over or any role to be played by council to say, actually, there is no justification for you opening your service right next to this one here with your new 400 places, because what that scenario is opening the door to is the large players coming up and swallowing up the smaller, often not-for-profits or community-based service providers. So that's what an unregulated market will end up doing. And so this SEP actually removes the control from council, raises it to become a state significant development application when somebody puts an application in for a new childcare facility. That has now been put through, as I understand, and it's only recent. I'm still undergoing the process of looking to see whether or not any of the submissions by the stakeholders were taken into account by the department, because when I got a briefing on it, I was told that the next step would be a response to those submissions. Now, I haven't seen any response given to those submissions. I have seen a change of minister since the SEP was first put on exhibition and when it's been put into practice. So as to whether there has been any changes, that remains to be seen. But I suspect that there won't be. I suspect that now we are looking at a completely unregulated market whereby anybody can say, I would like to open a childcare service, and it'll be lay down misère, no problem at all. So there's and we've seen what happens with an unregulated market. We're seeing with electricity prices is a great example of what happens with an unregulated market, and it doesn't cure the problem in terms of high fees in the early childhood sector, because you've already got so many fixed costs that to be able to talk about competition in this space becomes quite ludicrous. The last thing that I want to talk about today is the big issue, and it is a big issue, about the gender pay gap and how that plays out in the early childhood education sector. I feel like that our sector is the epicentre of that argument, because we've got a 90% women's workforce. There's this ridiculous historical hangover, and as you know, the ridiculous concept that it's just a babysitting service should have gone out the window a long time ago, but it's still reflected in the pay packets. And that's something that needs to be looked at so closely by federal and state governments. And I know the IEU is prosecuting the case to ensure that teachers with the same qualifications that are working in the early childhood education sector have pay parity with the teachers with the same qualifications working in the education sector. It is an insane scenario that you could have physically be on the same site and just be walking through a gate and have a $30,000 pay difference between a teacher in a preschool setting versus a teacher in a school setting. That is discrimination in its highest order, and it's something that has to be cured, and government and business play a role in this. So it impacts not only on families, and the fact that I know of women who are passionate about looking after and educating, teaching children, and yet they can't stay in the sector because they can't pay their mortgage. And instead they'll go and get a job down at Woolies, packing shelves of a night time, just so they can be able to afford the bills that come in for their family each week. So there is a fundamental flaw in our system where we aren't properly valuing those who deliver the all-important education to our children at the most critical time of their lives. Because the work that you do is some of the most important work that anybody could be doing, but it is not shown in your pay packets. And I can't help but think that preschooling and a preschool education has the power to reduce inequality. And yet in our system itself, there is a fundamental inequality in the way that the workers in the system are valued. So it is something that I'm certainly looking at closely. It is largely a federal issue, and I don't mean that just to be able to buck pass, but it is something that is something state and governments need to be looking at closely. The current Minister for Early Childhood Education addressed this question directly in budget estimates recently, and when she received the question, her response was, "That's a topical issue." Well, I disagree. It's not a topical issue. This is actually a really fundamental, important issue. And if she doesn't get that, then there's a problem. Because it not only impacts on those that work in the sector, but it's also impacting on the quality of the care and the education that's being provided in the services. Because if you aren't properly valuing your workers, you are going to get a high turnover. You're going to get teachers coming into the sector as a mere stepping stone to get into the public school sector or another teaching in the school system, because they will be able to afford their mortgage. So we've got a problem if we can't keep people that are passionate about the sector, who have trained to work in the sector, who would be the people that we want in our preschools and teaching our preschoolers. If we can't retain them in the system, there is something fundamentally wrong with the system, and it must be a part of of the solution going forward. And at the moment, it just seems to be, from federal and state government, head in the sand approach. I certainly, when I raised it on the floor in Parliament during the last year, and I had the then Education Minister Adrian Piccoli sitting on the other side of the dispatch box in the centre of Parliament, and he said, I mentioned something about the devaluing of workers in the sector, and he said, "Well, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to do anything about it? What are you going to do about it?" From the other side, and I thought, and I wasn't quick enough to respond to him, but on my feet. But I thought, if we don't talk about it, does it just go away? It doesn't go away. So we must talk about it and we mustn't ignore it, so that going forward we create a system where not only are we reducing inequality for the children and improving their lives for their whole lifetime, but also having a sector where it doesn't reflect and reinforce inequality in the way that the workers are valued. Now, I'll come back to where I started with my story about Alison. Alison, when I looked at her 2-year-old daughter, I thought, she's just got to be in. I just wanted to get her to be in a safe place. I want her to be getting the early childhood education that will make a difference to her life and hopefully be able to help her break the cycle that her family is stuck in. But I also see that the emotional, physical, financial abuse that Alison herself had and continues to suffer from, I feel like the inequality and the gender pay gap across our society, not just in early childhood education, that is the inequality that we must be addressing, so that ultimately we see a reduction in the way that we see that women are treated equally. I don't think it's too long a bow to draw, because I know, speaking to my local police, the biggest issues they deal with are domestic violence and mental health issues. These are issues that are fundamentally, that are founded on a lack of equality, and it's reflected in the whole gender pay gap discussion. And so this has got to be part of the whole discussion that we have about reducing equality across our communities. So the preschooling, yes, we can use it to its best effect to reduce inequality, but we must tackle inequality in this broader sense, so that women are valued equally and we reduce the harms that many women suffer in our communities on a daily basis. So on that note, and I don't mean to leave it on such a bleak note, I'm again so disappointed that I'm not with you today, because not only do I not now get to field any questions from you, which I really did appreciate last time, I'm not there to learn from the questions that you give to me. So I understand there's going to be a session held now where you get to write any questions and they will be given to me, and I welcome any of those. If you've got invitations for me, if you would like me to come to your services, I would love to come. So please let me know, get in contact. My details will be made available to everybody, because I know that every centre that I go to, I learn something new, because you are the experts, you are the people that have the passion, commitment, understanding of all that you do, and I want to make sure that any policy we develop going forward captures all of that, so that we can create a thriving, equal, beautiful sector going forward. And my final message in terms of myth busting, and I'm sure you've had a terrific conference on all of this so far, but my final myth to bust is, where's a woman's place? A woman's place is in a union. Thanks everybody.